we have Bruno, we have Dr. David Chandross, we have Brit, who's already here, and I'm going to be here as well with all of you. So first off, I'm not going to introduce Brittany. I just did less than, 20, 30 minutes ago. But I am definitely going to introduce the two new gentlemen that we have for the panel, who are Bruno Setola. He is a game thinker. He is from Playspace. He's a game thinking consultant, and he does plenty of things in the space. Dr. David Chandross, to many of us, would not need an introduction, but I'm definitely going to do so in any way because he's been working on gamification in learning for quite a few years. He's now especially working. Well, we had a recent interview to update what is David doing on Professor Game. Great stuff. $3 million simulation, advanced gaming environments, federal grants. He's doing plenty of very, very exciting stuff across Canada in higher education and has done quite a bit for the space as well. And that's why I'm excited to welcome all three of you to this panel. Welcome, Brit, Bruno, David.
Hello.
Hi, glad to be here.
Happy to have you. So the first thing, and definitely the starting question of a panel like this one, which is titled Gamification and Effective Learning, Where Do Things Go Wrong, is, what do you think? Where do things go wrong with gamification of learning? I'll start with some of the newcomers. Let's go with David, who is already getting ready to speak. So go ahead. I don't want you to be...
There's things that we should talk about at conferences like this, because this is a conference where we have some background and we don't have to define games and spend all the time on that. I'm at the WHO. We've just finished a $500,000 game with the UN World Food Program that's in distribution. You can all play it. We have a game design unit at the WHO that I was asked to develop. We're hiring new staff all the time. We're up to about 4 members. We'll probably have half a dozen on the unit. Britt, we should be talking. It's ridiculous that the World Health Organization is not talking to Microsoft on cutting edge initiatives and that we're not somehow finding ways to work together. So I think I would open by saying work gets stuck in education. So I think there's not enough of this going on, that we don't know where the other people are. We know where they are, but we don't have time to engage. So I think the collaborations between leaders like Microsoft, WHO, UNESCO, UN, and then NGOs, et cetera. The other area that I think is interesting is what's happened in educational design. There's been something tragic, and it has been a destruction of the creative imagination. And people who are instructional designers are amongst the most vibrant and educated people I meet in my everyday work. And they are also the most oppressed. They are slapped into silliness when they say the word game. To this day, we're working on a game to teach surgery right now. Well, can you imagine what the surgeons are saying? What? So there's that whole layer you have to get through. So there is a level of knowing. So of course we end up retreating to simulation games. Hi, you're in a busy surgical unit and you get X points if you find the forceps. So we stay in simulation. So there's something about the way we're training educational that we need more training. I teach a course at Ryerson on it. I know that Sententia does incredible work. What's her name? Oh,
Monica.
Yeah, Monica Cornetti. I know that people are doing it at UK Chow. But Monica and UK are outside of the main institutional organizational loop. They come in and out, but they're working with all levels of industry. When we're working with big organizations with high conservative resistance, we have a different kind of game there. And I think the third element is that I think that I'm interested in game worlds. And that's what my colleague, Kat Schreier, who's one of the best game people in the world. She was recruited by WHO. She's at Morenus College in the States. She's written about 100 books, MIT, Columbia, that. But we all design the same way. When they hired Kat, I didn't know her, but we had the same thing we did. Oh, you wanted to teach emergency medicine? Let's have you travel through time to ancient Japan where someone's been just cut with a samurai sword. Deal with that. Someone's been bit by a snake, so you travel through time to Egypt. That kind of creativity is called game world design, and we immediately think that way. And more of that seems to happen. Because I'll just say, to finish my opening spiel, is that watch Netflix. We're using the algorithms at Netflix at WHO. When you say the word heart, all kinds of suggestions are going to start coming up on your screen and accessing it. I produce, just because of my love, action adventure games. with a lot of script writing and a lot of deep backstory. Not, hi, you've got a Pizza Hut and you've got to make 100,000 this year. You've got a point. I want to know deep backstories to deal with human pain and tragedy. So we use mythology. The last 2 games we produced were Carthage, based in ancient Carthage. One was based in ancient Alexandria. One was based in urban Detroit. And our newest game is based on traveling the world in 1931. And we spend a lot of time in that development. So narrative development has to get out of that 2001 simulation and do what Netflix does for you, make you so addicted. We're making a game on female genital mutilation, FGM. Well, there's ways to make that engaging without scaring people off. So I would ask you all, please use your imaginations and stop being afraid. Don't be afraid. Be fearless. End of my speech. Bruno, I'm so excited to see what you have to say.
Plenty of thought to bring into this. Thank you, David, for bringing all of that. There's all the work that you guys are doing there in the UN. I know Brit has just shared a lot of what she's doing as well in Microsoft. There's plenty of stuff to discuss here. But again, I want to bring you guys and bring you back in with what can go wrong when we're doing gamification. What do you think? Bruno, you haven't had a chance to speak, so go ahead.
Well, there's a lot of things that can go wrong, right? So luckily, I mean, there's a lot of literature on it. So we know sort of what the pitfalls are, and we have some good ideas of where the solutions might lie. But if I listen, for instance, to David talking about, these super immersive game experiences and saying, use your imagination, I totally agree on the imagination. I just wonder why they need to be, $500,000, multi-million-dollar games, in the sense that, I study everything in games, board games, video games, but also, for instance, LARP, Nordic LARP is a very interesting one to mention here. So I once played a Nordic LARP here in the Netherlands. There's quite a good community here that does it in Utrecht. And the game is called Old and Wise. Now, in this game, you are put into role play, but not like Dungeons and Dragons role play. No, like you're in your normal clothes, but you put on maybe, another set of glasses or a hat to indicate that you're playing a role, because you always have to have the safety to get out. And you are giving a list of things that can go wrong once you get older and older and older. Like, you can't hold your pee, you can't see, you can't hear, you can't smell. But everybody gets this list in a random order. And every time there's a little chime or a bell, well, it's indicated by music, actually, the song Old and Wise, you go into the next round and you add that to your list of deficiencies, let's say. When you do that, and there's just 2 actors playing nurses, but basically they don't really interact with you. They sort of actually ignore you, as in a real, elderly home. Oh, by the way, you're in an elderly home. That's a setting, right? And then at the end, you evaluate what happened. So it's all in your imagination. You pretend you're that old person. You pretend you're going fast, like super fast forward through the years. And then they even have some interventions where there's some grandchildren passing by. And they do some interesting things. For instance, the first time they come by, for only 1 or 2 specific people sitting there, they're interested, they're saying, how are you doing? The second time they come by, it's 5 years later, they're saying, yeah, we have children now. I don't really have time to talk now. The third time, they just sit there and check their phone. I've seen people break down and cry and say, is this how old people are treated? Now, that's a LARP. But as you can tell, this is also used to train health workers to immerse themselves in there and to understand the difficulties that people can have, but not in a fixed order. Not everybody gets old in the same way. And I think that is the power of imagination that we can use, which, what did that thing cost? 1,000 euros, maybe, in hours, hardly any props. So my question in return would be, yes, I totally agree on the imagination. Does it always need to be competing with Netflix budgets and blockbusters?
Yeah,
very good. I love the challenges in there.
Respond to that briefly. The games we produce, most of the games we produce that I've talked about, Carthage and Alexandria Hypatia, we produce in Canada. They're text. You can make them on Vine. You can make them in Articulate. You can make them on a WordPress blog. All of our games, now we have an engine that over the years has been built with a lot of partnership money. That is a game engine that can be reskinned to keep, because all the games are ultimately, from where we see it, is a currency source and a currency sink. That's really what a game is. Things are offered, things are spent, and how you manage that sink you want. Now, in Articulate alone, so I would reassure you, Bruno, that we certainly, you're making a really valid point, and I'm glad you brought it up. We produce text-based games, and the way one of our games might look is you have a panel, you have an epilogue, and then we have Adobe Image. We have an account with Adobe. They have unbelievable images and music, anything you'd ever want, and the images are maybe $12 a shot. We write a panel, a story. We build the story. You have a panel. The panel has a picture and music, and you have 3 choices. You choose your own adventure, and it's not branching. We have 80 levels we built in the game because of the architecture. Building levels in a game, believe it, is really hard. So as Bernard can tell you, he's got a whole software, but in the game, every 4 levels, a panel opens. It says, well, now you're on a boat, Do you want to go north or south or east? And now, whichever one you pick, you go on. Now, the story progresses ultimately no matter which way you pick. So no 2 players have the exact same story, because if there's 20 panels with 3 choices, I picked A, then B, then C, they picked C. If I played it again, I could pick other ones. How did we deal with it? The way we dealt with it was working with a gamer who had a degree in computer engineering. We hired them. If the story is about you transforming as a person in your life search, then the actual things you do in the game can all be connected to a backstory without saying, well, they picked a boat, so that means we have to have quests that take them on a boat. No, on the boat, you learn that your father was an abuser, and that the first one was killed in a war, and that you've never really resolved the pain of how your mother was treated. But if you take the yak to Tibet off that same panel, you might think about your goals in life. And so we're having the character deal with an internal movement towards self-actualization or self-discovery. But anyways, we build them all in text with images, and you can build them in Articulate or Vine, and I don't know if you guys are using Figma. You were asking Brit about tools. Are you using Figma? Yeah.
I haven't.
It's free. Get it today. It's amazing. It's a complete storyboarding instrument. You can take any images you want from the community, and there are thousands of them, and build the entire game. And then you can give it to an Articulate designer who can then turn it into Articulate. You can build the entire game experience in Figma. It's just absolutely amazing. It blows Miro and everything out of the water. So some of these prototyping tools allow us to see what the game is, to give it to a limited users as we build module by module. We've learned our lesson. Let them play with it for a few minutes. Don't build the thing and then ask people to check it out, because by then, hopefully, Bruno, that gives you some room to respond. I want to hear more about these low-tech games, and Brit and Rob, help us steer us a little bit onto how we deal with these
Definitely. So 2 things here. Love the challenge. Love that David jumped into the challenge, as I know he always does. You have to see him on the Facebook group, Gamification Hub. Every time there is a challenge and he's into it, he jumps all in and makes the discussion super interesting as well. So thanks for that, David, definitely. The other thing, you mentioned Figma. Figma is a great tool as well. There is an educational use to it. So if you're using it for educational purposes, and we're on the learning day, there's a big chance that is the case. You can have sort of a team building things in there incorporated. Whether you're a student or you're a teacher, you get sort of further rights to do stuff in Figma. I'm discovering Figma myself in the past few months. It is fantastic. I'm using it for my UX UI design camp. But I still wanted to hear, before we move on to the next topic, what does Brit think about all of this?
So, by the way, there's another one in the chat. Machinations, is that how? So, anywho, it looks like David is saying imagination is the problem, or what could go wrong. Bruno is saying cost is the problem, or what could go wrong. Bruno, I agree with you. Every time I talk to people, they're like, we don't have money to hire anybody. You know what I mean? Whether it's David's game designer or someone to manage the program. So what I feel can go wrong is that the learning itself does not relate to the actual learner, and that the problems, the buy-in, we talked about this earlier today in another chat, the buy-in when you simply put game can drop. people are like, what? I'm not playing a game. David mentioned it too. I'm not playing a game to learn how to do surgery. I'm not doing that. So how do you get around that? And David and Bruno have already said it, but I want to give you my examples because they stole my thunder. But you have to make it relate back to the person, right? You have to make it right back to all people. And I think that's where the more of these examples that are out there in the world, the better we all are going to be able to simply put learning in an employee standpoint, because we're proving left and right that game does work for very, very serious topics and conversations. So let me give a few examples, please. So Microsoft has a card game that you can play virtually. It's called Truth and Insights. Being it. But what it allows you to do, there are preset topics in there. So we use it to have career conversations. It'll talk about what's your core values. And as you pull your card, very similar to another board game out there. Gosh, I cannot remember the name. But you'll have a card that has the topic, and then you have like a response card that you lay on top. You do this, your whole team that's in the virtual game environment gets to respond with one of 5 actions. And then you, as the person that's playing at the moment, gets to say, you know what, Bruno, you said you learned something new. What'd you learn from my comment? You know, and you kind of foster that conversation. So it allows teams to get going. We also use this for allyship, for covering for our diversity inclusion topics. So we were able to get really down into the core elements of a Microsoft culture conversation and just get teams talking, especially because most of us now have not met in 2 years in person and seen each other. Also Minecraft, sorry to be siloed in my world, but Minecraft now has an education version called Active Citizen. This is taking the four of our Nobel Peace Prize winners and putting those real life serious topics in front of kids. So something like climate control. There's one aspect of it where they have to have enough trees, right? They've got to do all the things that make the climate right now, but also right and sustainable for their future. And the game explains to them, if you're not an active citizen now at 6, 7, 8 years old, then you won't have a great world to live in later in life. So again, that's at a K-12 kind of environment there, but still teaching the fact that gaming is a way to learn very serious topics. And then I don't know if you guys saw, this is outside of my realm. If anyone helped with it, then kudos to you. But Lego, oh my goodness, we're a Lego family left and right. They just came out with a little kit that they're giving to kids with cancer that show them what the MRI or the CSAT CAT scan room will look like. So these children that are struggling, they don't like this hospital environment, they're building these little things, which is great, right? But then it gives them that chance to have the little Lego guy go through the machine and see how it's operating, you know, and there's a training that comes with it, a little booklet that shows them some of the images that, you know, the lab tech is seeing on the screen in the back and so forth. So again, putting these real life situations and making serious games actually fun, but on serious topics, that's going to help us overcome people that are like, did you say game? Nah, I'm not signing up for that.
So that's a very interesting thing that you bring up. I actually mentioned it this morning. Even within, like my biggest worry personally, and from an industry perspective, is not only, of course, you know, having these stakeholders be afraid of games. That's definitely a big thing that we need to take care of a lot of times. But I don't know if you faced it as well. Having fellow colleagues who you know are doing something in the gamification world, serious games, game thinking, call it as you may, they're not mentioning that they're doing anything around the lines of games. What do you feel about this? I gave my perspective in the morning, so I'm not going to repeat much around it. I know that there's these sort of two positions. I respect them both. You know, I think that they're both trying to push forward the industry. What do you think? What are your thoughts on this? I call it gamophobia, but within the experts in this same industry that we're at. You can start that one, Brit, because you brought up the topic.
Okay, so yeah, I love gamophobia. I don't hide from it. If you join me on LinkedIn, my little caption thing says "Make learning fun." Like I don't want to hide from it. I wish that the entire industry would not hide from it, but I do agree with you that they are. One example that I can give is the tool that we are currently choosing to use is called Centrical, and they used to be called Game Effective. They actually rebranded at the start of the pandemic, and they've had 3 times the clientele pick up by just having a title that doesn't have the word game in it. That's really sad, you know, but it's an honest reality. And who's to say that it wouldn't have picked up anyways, because the pandemic obviously gave us more reason to have these tools that are good at collaborating, connecting, boosting morale, etc., in addition to learning. But it is in effect, it is a proven fact that by taking game out of their title, they did have more buy-in, and they've now gone to bigger companies. We were already with them, I like to say, but they do have some of our competitors now on their ticket as well. And I have to wonder, is it because they came at it from performance management tool aspect instead of here's a gamification tool? So I don't.
That can go either way, Brit. It can certainly go either way, and I don't want to steal thunder because
go for it.
Comments would be interesting here, but Axanify in Canada did that, and they just stopped making games altogether. So once you shift and you say we're really not into games, Brit, it can actually go the other way, and they ended up in micro learning with J.D. Dillon, and they'll do a game if they're pushed, and their games were all like multiple choice questions, and you would be putting, and your putting accuracy increases. So they talked about a question. They consulted certainly with Carl Kapp, I believe, in the original design. I don't consider that a success. They got a bid injection of about $6 million, and I think they are being successful, but they had to rebrand and get the hell out of games. And they said when they tried to bring games in any kind of depth to industry, I don't know all of their inside story, but we certainly know on the ground here that you can make it so ungame-like that you're really just building a new LMS. I don't know if the word game might be holding us back, because the word we've always used in Canada in our research is game worlds and advanced simulation environments, SAGE, simulation and advanced gaming environments. At the WHO, for example, all assessment now is going to go take place through a game, because we're part of a simulation unit, and we can't assess your clinical skills without a game. So this is a way, I think, of embedding games as assessment tools. They may not even be used to teach. They might simply exist in the assessment realm sometimes. But Bruno, I want to give you some room to respond here for sure.
Sure. Okay, so I can say two things about it. Well, one is that why do people not want to play games? I mean, apart from the fact that they think it's embarrassing, like, you know, child's play. But what is more interesting is something that Sebastian Deterding, you must have heard from him, I'm sure, said, which is that paradoxically, people think that games are fun doesn't mean that if you bring games to people, that they will have fun. I have to explain that a little bit. So the fun in playing games is the fact that it's autotelic, that you do it because you want to. Because we tend to forget that before I play a game, I look at my library of games. I have like 500 board games here, for instance. I'm going to look for the game that I am feeling like playing at that moment. I'm not a certain player type. I have different motivations, different times of the day, or depending who comes in, I'll pick a game that I want to play. So it's my free choice to play it. But assuming that because I like playing games, we'll just let Bruno play a game and he'll enjoy it, is that's the pitfall. It's assuming that, because either because of multiple reasons. I might not like the game because I don't like that genre, or I might not like it at that time of the day, or I don't like to play it with those kind of crowd, with this kind of crowd. But more importantly, you're forcing me to play it. It's not out of free will. So that's one point I want to make, and I think he was really spot on there. Yeah, the second thing is, what was my second thing? I'll leave it at that.
I've been making notes as you all speak things, but the idea of a digital leash, it's interesting. We did a number of studies at Ryerson University, where I'm based, and we looked at hundreds of students across different programs, and where courses were converted to games or game elements were added. And even when they were forced to play it and they didn't want to play it, we had 80% approval, over 80% at the end of it, valued the experience. So, and the value we always took when we started to design with my colleague Raquel Meyer here in Canada was, we never asked you for permission before we gave a lecture. Now when it comes to games, we're getting all democratic and stuff. Huh? Just play the frickin' game to get through the course, and that's it. And and be done with you. And it's amazing because we do that with everything else, but all of a sudden we're behind. Why don't we do what we do with everything else? We know the game works, and I can prove games work. I got literature climbing up the walls on I post some of it on LinkedIn on stuff that goes on in deactivation of default mode networks, event stimulation of ventral stripe. There's that, but I think sometimes you just have them play the darn thing. But you know what, Bruno? I think we can address some of this. You've brought up so many good points. Javier Velasquez, do you know his work, Javier? He might produce 4 versions of the game, and you pick the one you want to learn the material. You want to go into Dragon Quest? Do you want the straight goods? Do you want to go to outer space? Javier is the new generation that says you can have it all. So I'm learned from Javier this approach to maybe, and what we're doing at WHO is the idea that we take the game as we build, module by module, and use some user testing, because we made some terrible, expensive mistakes in the past building a game, asking for tweaks, and then it's, and there are so many player types. I don't know if you want to go with Anjay's 6 types. Do you want to go with Bartles? Do you want to make your own up? Or do you want to be like Bruno? Where
I have my own.
I think it was Sebastian Detarding. I think it was him. It was a 3-year study done at a university where they gamified the entire university, the entire degree program. And people kept switching roles. The first year, some people loved it. And the second year, they said, enough with the game already. Other people hated it the first year. And the second year said, hey, I'm glad it's a game. So you brought up a good point, Bruno. People actually change in relationship to it. But we can't just keep, I think there's one level where what I prefer to work in is mythology, because I work with what's called semiotic resonance, and I'll leave it at that. Semiotic resonance, we learned it in addiction management games. We were producing people, adolescents with opiate addiction. And we worked with them to find out what worked. Inside of all of us, according to Carl Jung or Joseph Campbell, is a mythological structure. It has crucifixions, it has rebirths, it has Nordic gods, it has Yoruban gods from Nigeria. There are many of them we're working with now. They're all common to the core experience. If I build my games, and I'm not like UK Chow, because he talks about these core drives and ectalysis, which is really good stuff. I love it. But I'm looking at a core unconscious drive toward what Maslow called self-actualization, or what Carl Jung called transpersonal psychology. I think there's a higher realm of the unconscious, of the artistic element of the self, the numinous quality. So I build for that. I would call it psychedelic building. And it doesn't mean you have to take psilocybin before you play, although it might help. The whole idea is that can we build games that talk to something deeper than the functional need to sell more pizza this quarter? Are we talking to games that help uplift you? And of course, your age group, Brit, if you're designing for 6-year-olds, there's another way to make that relevant if you're working with octogenarians. I'll leave it at that.
I think, David, it goes back to the same point, though. And Kareem, if I'm saying that correctly, talked about the inclusivity. It's a huge point, right? So when you're building your learning, are you building it for yourself? So to Bruno's point, you might have a lot of fun building it, but that doesn't mean the learner is going to enjoy it. And that comes back to the persona and knowing what motivates your learner and how they want to learn. And to David's point about cultural influences, whatever it might be, right? What kind of stuff is happening up there with your learner? And then that's how you can hone in on if it's going to be fun and purposeful and have impact and so forth, because you have to build for them, not for yourself.
This is where I have issues with persona theory, and I know some of the experts in it. So they've convinced me that personality is exists and emotions are real and mood is real. But there are so many different personas you might capture in an online game that's going to reach, let's say, 700 or 800 people over time. It's really hard to anticipate those needs. I've retreated to core mythology because I believe in each person, doesn't matter where you're from in the world, these core mythological drives are there. And I think UK Chow has talked about core drives. But it's a tough one, Brit, and I don't know whether. And I know game designers have this problem. Otherwise, everybody would have triple gate titles. A lot of games never make it to publication.
Well, and it looks like Bruno's.
Sorry.
It looks like Bruno's wall of board games too, right? That's why you have so many different ones, because
we started in board games
that day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we started in board games, and then we had to scale, so we got money, and we get more money, and we build. Board games are great, but they're just not great at reaching 7,000 people all over the world. But board games, to me, one of my grad students is now working on it. And Bruno, I don't know if there are games like this, where it's a board game, but you have an app with it.
Yeah.
So you have an adventure, and then really good video footage comes up in the headphones of you riding a horse through the jungle, and then you go back to the board game to move your piece and an action card. I think these fusions of digital and reality, what I call through the looking glass, are going to dominate. The drive at WHO is immersive because we're trying to be the future of education. None of us like what education is now. As a standard practice, we like good teachers, but the future of education, I'm wondering if we could raise, and this is Rob, I'm stealing Rob's job, but I'm wondering the metaverse, which I spoke at the Metaverse conference 2 weeks ago, the big one. When we are in the metaverse, where do we go? Are we not getting ready for it? I'm just curious as to what y'all think, because we're having to get 3D thinking going to join the metaverse and not have learning outside the metaverse, because we're going to be in this video game getting our driver's licenses very soon. What do y'all think? Sorry, Rob. I'm just so curious how you're coping.
I love it, David. Go
You
ahead.
should check out Raf Koster's tweets on that, because you know Raf Koster?
No, I don't.
Ah, okay.
Theory of fun. I think you've heard of it.
So,
for sure.
Yeah.
All right.
watch his tweets. He's all over the metaverse. I mean, he
Good or bad way.
predicted it 10 years ago and already described all the problems that would arise in the.
And Carl Kopp did a metaverse thing a couple weeks ago too. So that's my co-author in the book that's coming out. So he and I have partnered very closely in this process here at Microsoft. But yeah, he was talking about metaverse, and I don't think you're going to be able to avoid it, like you said, David. I think the better part is how do we prepare people for it, right? And that is doing gamified learning for sure. This is going to help, but people are not going to be ready to be in metaverse for a lot of the things that they might start it with. But yeah, the more we do to make it, I mean, even today on a small scale, our networking here in the Remo tool, I mean, that was a little tiny metaverse in that sense that we popped around, picked a new seat, hung out with people, and then popped back out and went to other ones. So that's the small scale ways that we start prepping people for what it might look like.
One thing I should mention is the work being done by my colleagues at the WHO Academy. What we've done now is they've got a LiDAR stick. You know, LiDAR is like a radar and connected to a cell phone. And incredible people at WHO have worked out the system where we walk to any emergency room in any hospital in the world. You just walk through the emergency room once. It's now in AR. AR goggles don't look like anymore. They look like this. The incident command team sits in front of it. It's for mass casualty management. We know that after a big bomb goes, well, look at Ukraine. When you've got 30 patients a minute coming to ER, people die because you're not doing the right procedures. So what it is it's the idea of you can map out real environments in 5 minutes. You can have it rendered. You can be in it. You want to put mesh skins on it, the thing will breathe and talk to you, or you can stand outside of it more functionally. And then we open up a software program that gives you green patients, red patients, code blue, how many a minute do you want. And each of these patients has what's called a life path, which I learned from Sim Leader in Montreal. That's their work. In Grand Theft Auto, everything you see, every character is one thing cloned and redrawn. In life pathing, every character actually has things it's programmed to do. So all of our patients will go through on an Excel sheet a series of changes. There are 1,600 patients in the pool. So that's a way of taking the real world, walking through your workplace, putting your goggles down, sitting at a table together, and then simulating your job. That's not very difficult technology. It takes some time, but I think this metaverse is not as difficult to imagine building games for as we might think, that you're going to need Unreal programmers and a team of artists, because we don't need any of that.
I was gonna ask well, two things. Let me just jump in here for a second. First off, I'm sure the audience is excited and learning a lot from this discussion. Make sure that if you have any questions, if anything is calling your attention, anything you want to dive deep on from the audience, make sure you type it on that chat so that we can know about it and we can further down the line as well. I see that there is plenty of stuff going in for the metaverse, so I did want to very quickly make a deeper dive into the metaverse in that sense. Like, not only how do we prepare for the metaverse, but how do we as the gamification of learning prepare people for the metaverse, but rather what does the metaverse look like for the future of gamified learning itself? What do you think?
I think Kareem for the audience made a great shout out. I'm sorry, Bruno, about just identifying the concepts too, right? Like, have we not talked about that all day? So they're saying, like, what even is NFT, DAO, metaverse, gamification? It's hard sometimes to even know what people are talking about. Go ahead, Bruno.
It's true.
Yeah, so it could go in two different ways, I guess. Like, So I'm surely not talking literally about David's simulations, because it seems to be something going on there that is quite interesting, the Jungian archetypes and such. But what the problem, the issue I have with simulations is that they have a limited depiction of reality, which means we have to simplify it. The second, maybe more important, is we put norms in there about what is the supposed rules in that simulation. What are you supposed to do? So putting norms into a simulation, I find quite dangerous, or at least a missed opportunity, because in a real life situation, there's always a chance to make choices of your own that may not be aligned with the norms or the rules. But in a simulation, there is no other way. Another thing, so it limits your view of what you think the world is, while the world is actually much richer than the choices offered in a simulation. So it simplifies the idea of reality in your head. I think that's an issue. The second thing is, simulations are often, look at SimCity. I mean, there's interesting articles about it, based on a specific kind of model of society. So for instance, if you take SimCity literally, in the first versions of it, you didn't even need parking spots. And now in the latest version, they found out they built in homeless people. And people are now trying to get rid of the homeless people, and they're starting to learn the trick. This is really intriguing. You got to look it up. The only way to get the homeless people out of your SimCity is to make sure that there's no empty buildings, so you got to break them down, and that there's no trash, because they feed on trash. So if you clean up your trash and get rid of broken down buildings, no homeless people. So people are trying to make sure to get 100% homeless-free cities. What does that teach us about the humanity of homeless people? I wonder, So that is my issue with simulations. Now, if you take VR, then we can go in two directions. Either VR is going to continue on that path and just make the sim more immersive based on, a LiDAR scan of the hospital, for instance. Mm. Or it could be this added layer, augmented reality, where we will still be able to have a dialogue outside of the norms and the rules of the game. Or maybe, because it can go further, a la Minecraft, maybe we will be able, and that is, I think, that would be the real future, that you can change those rule sets.
That's some powerful stuff, Bruno. It's just such powerful insights and so eloquently put, really. One thing we gave up on many years ago was simulations, and we picked up what we call simulacra, which comes from the work of Baudrillard and hyperreality. So we use a simulation as an open-ended inquiry driving. It's like case-based instruction. So we say, you've got a 25-year-old male coughing up blood. What kinds of things do you want to do for them? And then you can begin to ask questions. So we're not making it like a simulation. We're letting you interact in the way that you wish. And then we let you choose the treatments you want, and then we roll the dice. And you can set up probability curves in the dice roll, which correspond to reality. We know there's a 60% correct hit rate on the first antidepressant a person is given. So if you're treating depression and you give Prozac, you roll the dice in the game, wah, wah. You got to go back and get a bet, just like the real world. So you can add a little bit of fuzzy, what I would call fuzzy simulation, but you hit a much deeper issue of the rules of the metaverse and who creates these rules. I'm afraid of the metaverse. All I can think of is misinformation in the next presidential election with the metaverse. I don't like the metaverse. I don't like what's happening. I don't think it's necessary. I don't like anything about it. I think, like the internet, it's been jammed down our throat with no consultation, and this is what we're doing. I don't like it. I want more and more time together. I don't mind Zooming and streaming with you, but I want to be with you in presence. I don't want to be living in an alternate reality. And, I've been playing World of Warcraft since it was released. I've raided every major boss. And I know the beauty of working together as teams when I can get the hell out of it. But if I can't get out and I have to renew my permit, I just feel that this is I think it's toxic. And I also would add one thing, Bruno, and I'd be curious. I think game culture, and I'm sorry, I'm speaking at my age, I think it's toxic. I don't like gaming culture. Now, there's a new game, Palia. Have you know about Palia? No. It's a cozy game. There's a whole new genre of games called cozy. Look up Palia, P-A-L-I-A. It's going to be released this quarter. It's ex-Blizzard people that said they were tired of fighting but wanted an immersive world. What if we made games that you could just live like Second Life was supposed to be, but with more adventure and more thickness? Second Life, you just flew around and visited Johns Hopkins in virtual space. Oh, fun that was. But what if the games are enriching and nourishing? So I think we have to address those, because I don't like gamer culture. I don't like e-games. It's probably showing my age, but I don't like how people are. I've made friends in World of Warcraft that weren't my friends 2 days later because they got a purple item and I didn't. and then we can go into Gamergate and misogyny in games. You know, Brit, you must have reflections on gender inequities in games and the gaming, the toxicity of even being a female game designer and what you go through at Blizzard. Hopefully not anymore. Blizzard Gate.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of that goes into it, right? And the thing for me is the impact directly on me is not as big. Not to say that anyone else's emotions are limited if you feel that way. It doesn't matter to me. I knew when I started in this industry, I was going into a male-dominated industry, and I kind of saw it as like, that sounds fun. So I don't mind, right? I want things to improve upon. I want equality. I want it to be more inclusive. But I'm okay that it's still a certain way for a while, because there's always going to be room for change and challenges. And those are areas that we can pick up and like try to improve upon, if that makes sense. So I'm not over here like sad about it, I guess.
I think for me, it's also managing things like competition, though, of which more than 60% of players want. They're really disappointed when there's no leaderboard. And I can say competition is no good. The same with violence in learning games. I'm having my students build combat learning games. Everyone says violence is bad. They sound like Tipper Gore in 1981. Don't listen to Marilyn Manson. You'll end up in a shooting. No, shooting stuff is fun. If I'm killing a tumor with my ray gun to have a kid visualize what his white blood cells are doing, if I'm killing depression, if I'm killing racism, imagine there's a demon in your game which is causing racism or causing disparity, and you can shoot that demon. That's more fun than this pamby-wamby, super politically correct way we have to work at education, where we never offend anybody. Part of the games, I would wonder, I'm going to feel, Rob, you're going to kick me. But I think games have to be subversive to be any good. Rock and roll was subversive. Games were subversive. They shouldn't become mainstream. They should always be like the Jester and always be subversive, because that's what refreshes the player. Otherwise, just send them to lecture and be done with it.
I do think, though,
I have opinions on the subject.
No opinion whatsoever. I do think when you look at game culture, though, you do have to, again, go back to who your learners might be. For instance, in my world, we have a global set of contact centers, right, that are taking my learning. And I can tell you that I'm just going to go out here and be on a limb. And if I offend anybody, please tell me and I will take it back. And I apologize ahead of time. But the Jamaican culture loved competition. Our Asian cultures don't know what to do with competition, right? So the value of climbing a leaderboard or whatnot, no big deal to them. They wanted to do it. And they even will ask questions like, is it okay if I've never been number one on the, so that's why I don't necessarily love leaderboards, because we're like, of course it's okay.
This is so important. The cultural differences. There's huge studies on cultural difference in gamers, and to ignore those is to be a doofus. Good stuff. There's a game played in China, JX3. Do you know about JX3? It's played by millions of Chinese. We never, because it's played behind the Chinese wall. Well, they have sifus in the game. A sifu is like your sensei. It's a martial arts-based game based on the history of Chinese martial arts. And there's real-life sifus who you meet in chat. As soon as you enter the game, they say, sifu, looking for new students. The sifu, and my student did a study with them and found out that when your life goes to shit, your sifu in the game is there for you in real life. That's amazing. There's no guild leader. That happens in World of Warcraft, I'm sure, in Final Fantasy. But this is someone that when your mama's sick will maybe help you with her. So there's this culture in Chinese gaming we don't have here, and we can learn a hell of a lot from. And we're working in Afrocentric gaming now. We're building Nigerian games. That's taken us into a whole other world again. So that culture, Brit, that's just beautiful stuff you're bringing up, that cultural element. How do we work with it instead of colonizing the world with Western combat games?
I think it comes down to the game elements. You talked about the game culture in general. So, for instance, take a step with me. So if you're thinking about the K-12ers, right, Minecraft education had to cut out that online multiplayer thing because of what you're saying. We could not give children access to these people of all ages talking and chatting amongst Xbox or whatever their platform of choice was, right, on the back end. So that is disabled when you're playing Minecraft for the K-12 education. Likewise, my learners, we had a conversation piece. And when we all went to work from home, there's no one walking up and down behind the cubicles checking to see if your conversations are work related or good to be having, right? And our learners, they actually are averaging around age 30. So I would like to think more mature than you would expect for, contact center potentially. To me, it was. But yet there were still things. It was being used for personal conversation and stuff. And this is on the job. So we needed less of that, get back to the workflow. And because they were at home and there was no monitoring now happening, Microsoft as a legal team decided we're going to cut out that element of our gamified learning program. So the conversations on the back end were no longer happening. Very similar to the kiddos, right? If you can't monitor the access that they're having to game culture, then we're just going to cut that out and not let them have the access. So David, I think you brought up a lot of good points too. There's a lot of things that go into which game mechanics are you going to include, game elements are you going to include, and a lot of that, the decision is based around those cultures, the age group, the purpose, the goal you have intended, and so on.
I think there's a very interesting sort of topic that you both brought up in different ways, and it's all about the intentionality, and of course then validating that intention that you have is actually working the way it should be. But and actually Bruno mentioned this a little bit earlier as well, like, simulations are an abstraction of reality and they don't show reality completely. And that's not only true, that's also intentional. That's okay. Like I do like to use an example of the root beer game that MIT invented in the 70s or in the 60s and is still being used to teach supply chain management. It is intentionally not representing reality. I get teachers, professors saying, but here, this could have this more detail and you could have all these things. No, you don't want it to have more details. You created it. And the smart people, whoever that created that, were very smart about saying what we want people to understand is the bullwhip effect in practice and in a very simplified situation. And after you see the simulation, you have a quick discussion around it, you will have a very clear picture of what and why that is a very big risk and why sharing information within the supply chain and all these things happens, right? And that is something of the intentionality that you're having within the creation of simulations, games, etc. So I wanted to see what your perspectives are on this and maybe delve a little deeper on that intention behind creating a game, and then, of course, validating if the intention is pulling through and doing all the play testing and all this. But how do you feel about this intentionality? And because we went into the metaverse, and the metaverse is kind of representing reality, but not really. How about using games to, teach something and the intentionality? What is the intention behind creating these things, and how do you feel about this?
I mean, one thing, Bruno, I'm curious to what you'd have to say, and I just wanted to preface the question. I don't like the destruction of agency that happens in many role-playing games. I'm not really an agent. I can't do what I want with my sword. I have to do the 3 moves they gave me. You've struck gold on that, Bruno, that there's something that we're just bullying the player around. And Marigo Raftopoulos, do you know her work? She's working with Juho in Finland. Marigo Raftopoulos. She's doing a project with Juho Hamari in Finland, looking at AI in gamification. Trying to get around some of the problems of AI and all the dangers and pitfalls and all the advantages to where AI can let you do more what you want to do, Bruno, which is create real agency. Anyways, I'm just curious.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they are from the country of Nordic LARP that I previously discussed, so they know their stuff,
Sorry to jump in just for a second. LARP, live action role playing. Is what you mean, just for anybody in the audience who might not. I tend to jump in for these things because every now and then that can be confusing for some people. So LARP, live action role play.
Yes, and there's a specific, there's a free form LARP in America, but in the Nordic countries, in Europe, it's called Nordic LARP, and it's a different. It's almost like serious LARP. Let's I don't know how else to put it. But anyway, can you repeat again, Rob, the initial question?
All right, so I did go all around the place. That is true. So let me bring it more concisely. When you are creating games, gamification, serious games, simulations, you typically have some sort of intention. That's why, I've seen many simulations that sometimes I feel like it's a little bit too much, and you could learn a million things, but then what is the thing or things that you're actually going to learn? Like making sure you narrow it down there. Does that make sense for you, or why not? Does that make sense for you? And what would be your perspective on that intentionality of where is my learning, gamification, simulation, whatever you're creating, aimed at, or maybe aimed at too many?
We're all bursting at this one because that's our job every day. Bruno.
Yeah. Well,
restraining myself here.
Yeah. On the edge of my seat here. No, lovely question, Rob. Thank you. If I'll repeat the thing about the simulation just to put it in perspective. If a game is there to teach me what is the right behavior, and the same goes for gamification in that respect, it's telling me what's right and wrong and what's expected of me, those built-in norms. I already told you I have an issue with that because it doesn't allow me to have my own, to develop my own thoughts. It's just like if I get the right thing, I get a cookie. If I'm a nice boy, I don't like it. So what can games do then? Well, I am a big believer in what I would just call games for dialogue, which are actually about discussing what is right and what is wrong. Games that have moral dilemmas. Do you know that game that just came out with the railroad? The railroad problem. What is it called? Who would you rather have the train run over? A drug addict or your grandmother, or something like that. It's this game where you have to build up a case, and it gets weirder and weirder. I mean, talking about toxic game, this is really politically incorrect game. But if you take that idea of that game, I could definitely see how I could change those cards in a more applied way and get some serious conversations going on about based on what moral, compass would you rather choose an older person or a baby? And this is also, I think, where you can overcome some of the problems of different cultures having different perspectives, because you get to talk about them. So it's, for instance, a well-known fact, I've been told at least, that, in Africa, an old person is most important. Like if you have to choose old person or young person, you let the old person live because they have the history. They are the connection with the ancestors. A child, oh man, they die so often. It hasn't got any experience yet. You're not losing much. I mean, exaggerating here, right? It might be politically incorrect. Whereas in the West, we have the opposite. The old person has no more value, is no longer productive in society, but the child is the future and can still become a productive member of society. So different cultures will have different ways that they will choose in this scenario what is the right way to go. And I think we shouldn't choose for them and tell them this is wrong or this is right. I think we should, create games that facilitate this ongoing dialogue. And I would go one step further even. I think we should facilitate games that are open to the players to be redesigned. And I have to point out to one of my, maybe the biggest hero that I have, Bernie de Koven. Bernie de Koven, he passed away, unfortunately. This is my Bible now, The Infinite Playground, who really, I guess, gives the answer to what do you do with all those different cultural differences. Gaming culture might be toxic, but player culture, like player community, building a player community where you constantly evaluate, is this still fun? Does it motivate me? And contextually, right? Like what motivates me now, once I've learned it, I'm bored with it. I'm not just talking flow theory. I'm also talking, I've mastered everything. Now I'm into exploration mode. Now I'm done exploring. Now I want to be more social. Oh, now I'm overfed with social connections. I rather be escapist now, Like this can change over time, very rapidly. I'll talk more about that actually in my talk on Friday, so I won't go too deep into it. But so Bernard de Koven, definitely check him out. I think player culture versus gamer culture, or I mean player community, would be one thing. And then I just got to show you this card because it's lying on my table all the time to remind me. Is this mirrored for you, or can you read it?
We can read.
It is a quote. Yeah. So I found this one somewhere online, and I really like it. What it says is, if you want to be really truly inclusive, and we were talking about toxic culture and maybe some people feeling that, you know, they're left out of the game, then I think we should get them to participate to shape and keep adapting the game, not once and then it's in the shop, but ongoing. I think that's one of the successes of you know, games like Minecraft, that the constant input of players and changing things. And I have to be honest here. There's a big difference with I shouldn't be talking about modders, you know, which is also known as labor, like getting people to modify your game for free, you know, free labor.
I mean, it's like the folded
players talking about what is the experience that will do it, you know, that will work for them. If we can do that, I think we will overcome a lot of these hurdles that we were just talking about, you know, toxic culture.
Folded is a very good example of collaboration. You all know the folded example? Bruno, you're aware of the folded game. It's where they brought a lot of people together to figure out a molecular problem about a protein folds, and you had a large player community, and they were able to, through AI, have people all over the world, and they were able to solve problems in a few minutes that had evaded scientists for years. So this idea of it, there's one group, Brit, because I know you want to respond. My only response to that, there's one team we've been working with in Nova Scotia that's been working with youth at risk and getting them up to digital literacy, et cetera. Most of these kids, some of them have a federal criminal records and jail time at age 14. So we're talking with a pretty tough group. What they did is they had many different game models. They were using Topia, they were using Jeopardy, they were using all kinds of different games, and they would see what the uptake was. And some of the things they thought they would love the most, Topia, they were cool on. Topia is a game where you create your own world. You can actually create your own world, and you can walk through the world and talk to each other and be in it. They thought it'd be a hit. You know what really won? Jeopardy. They went nuts for Jeopardy. The engagement went right up. So the idea of being like Bruce Lee, like you're a ninja, you've got all kinds. That's where, again, I think people like Javier Velasquez are going to bring us to a new world. And maybe Brit is part of that new breed of people that are going to keep moving and staying agile and producing game systems. The problem we have sometimes is that we have to produce incredibly complex game economies on Excel spreadsheets. They take months to produce. You learn this material, like we have 90 different simulacra cases, and they have a certain point in library, and then there's learning. But what we try to do is we try to follow Bartle, I call it a bastardized Bartle, because it really isn't what Bartle would say, but we bastardize him. The idea that you build your game to reach 4 different types of play goals: achieving, competing, exploring, and socializing. So we try to have at least those activities in the game with multiple engagement loops. But as you know, Anjay has come forward with 6 different types, etc. So Britt, I'm just curious as to what your thought is. But I think agility, Bruno talks about an agility in design, is really going to be necessary to build the game system so that it can move like your Minecraft.
Yeah, and I think, Bruno, you nailed it. You have to make sure that it's even needed. After a certain while, the motivations have changed, the purpose has changed, your learning goals have changed. I mean, David, I'm sure yours is the same. Our products change all the time. You have situations that are going to change all the time, right? Or equipment's new, or whatever, scenarios new. This hospital's not even supporting that kind of thing anymore, you know? So now you got to train up a whole nother team with the same thing. So you have to be able to grow with your learning program. And you also need to constantly have somebody, again, like I said in my speech earlier, you have to have someone taking ownership of the task of reevaluating, and constantly. Yeah. You can't just assume that this is going to work and it worked right now and it's going to keep working. You've got to do things. For instance, we cut out conversation when we went to work from home to make sure they were still focused on the actual learning. You know, when we go back to the office, who's to say we might add it back one day? You know, so there's just things that are going to constantly be changing, and someone's going to take ownership and do that and make it happen for sure.
Well, there's an elephant in the room, and you brought it up very early, Brit. And this is the idea of the technology. Listen, people don't have the right platforms. Where do you go for a game engine that's reskinnable? Because what people do is they go to a vendor for $100,000. They build a game about hand washing. Well, now you want to teach nutrition. Oh, let's get another $100,000 together. You need a game engine that's reskinnable. You've got Blue Rabbit. You've got Game Learn in Spain. I don't know if you know Game Learn. If not, go find her today. She's the most amazing. They've got they do something Blue Rabbit doesn't do. It's another approach. Amazing. And then there's Launch 57, who we work with here in Edmonton, Alberta, that are game engines. I don't know any other game engines in the world that you can buy, configure, and say, and make new rules. You have to have that. Now, if you don't have that technology, you know what you're left with? Articulate. There are articulate game designers that can do amazing stuff.
But it still takes them time.
Watch you into all they can give you is different type of points. If I want to buy a shield, and then I want to, so we don't have the technology to do it, and we never have any money in education. So I think we've been but we've been able to run really good games and WordPress blogs, because if you give case studies and each week they have to do them, and you sit down with pen and paper and you keep track of the players, old school Michael Van Hunen style. And I have to mention, Michael, I don't know if Michael is talking at this conference, but escape rooms is such a powerful way to make something that can always change and really grabs a lot of players. And there are only 3 countries in the world that excel at escape rooms: Canada, yay, and Japan, and the Netherlands. They're really popular in those countries for some bizarre reason. But I think escape rooms could be changed each week to give you new kinds of experience. Really good points, folks. Stuff I haven't thought about that much, to be honest.
I want to add to your list too.
Right.
Great.
Just a second, if I may, because we're running out of time. So I wanted to give each of you an extra minute to wrap it up and give anything else. I wanted to make sure Michiel, who was being mentioned by David, has a talk tomorrow. That was, I think, Pete who mentioned it, just for you folks to know. And again, please wrap it up in a minute-ish, if you can, whatever your thoughts are on the subject, because even though it's hard to realize, we're running out of time.
Okay, I'll do 30 seconds. So the Centrical tool I use is a game engine. You can change the rules. You can put things in. You can add SCORM files if you want.
What's it called?
Centrical. I'll put it in the chat.
Please do.
But there's also one from Dr. K. I don't know which European country she's in. I forgot. It's called PentaQuest. And there are also teams like Works out of Copenhagen. That's going to take me a minute to spell. That are helping companies. You can hire them to come in and create a game for you. So there are people that will help you at not much cost, Bruno. Go ahead, Bruno.
All right. Well, I saw in the chat the Optimist writer. Sorry, the name is going away, I think, saying I would love game design to be taught at school. I would like to get onto that point. I think what we could really use in schools in general is game literacy, like understanding game design beyond, Monopoly, etc. Because I think the skill of, iterative design, of changing the rules, seeing what works, changing it, and having this player community, a la Bernie de Koven around it. If we could, nurture such activities in school, you wouldn't have, you can even create games for that, or workshop formats for that, but not to let them play games, but let them create their own games, and understand that their future, they can continue doing that, like reinventing the game of work, the game of family, the game of, I'm a game thinker, so I see the whole world as games. I think that would be fantastic. So I totally agree on the Optimist writer that hopefully for the same reason that would be the way to go, to really let them learn and deal, with life. I
would add, brilliant, absolutely brilliant commentary. I've learned so much from the all of you today. Really have. I've been taking a lot of notes. I think the main thing, we have to train people how to be serious game designers. I'll tell you one thing: game designers suck at it. I'm sorry if I offend you. I don't mean every game designer ever born. But every time we work with a game design company, it's the same problem. They don't understand how to integrate behavioral outcome into game design. That takes years. I would rather have an instructional designer that did a postgraduate course in serious game design than a game designer who tried to learn the basics of education, which takes about 4 or 5 years. You can't rush through education. You have to understand. What do you think a teaching degree is? They don't send you there for a month and give you a few pointers. I think the game designers can be coders. We've got them that we can talk to, but we need this new profession called serious game design. Where do you go to get a degree in serious game design right now? I'm not game developer, not at all. I'm not interested in game developers. We've got billions of them looking for work. They're being pumped out of the game design. A serious game designer is someone that designs serious, or whatever you want to call them. They really know how to, it's a wheel. And then the hub is the competencies of the behavior change you want. The spokes are the rules. The tire is the theme and the narrative. You got to integrate that. And it has taken me since 1996 to learn how to do it. And every week I learn something new. It's a freaking art. It is a lifelong passion. And I'm not a game designer. And I'm not a curriculum designer anymore. I'm a serious game designer that's a specific niche. Where the hell do you go for training? And I tell you, it's inadequate right now. There should be university degrees or college diploma, something proper with transcripts and marks to train these professionals. Because right now we're just making it up as we go along. I think it could be time that we all have some kind of standards of practice to say at least everybody's got 3 years of training in basics of behavioral change education, emotional, behavioral neuroscience, all the stuff you might want to have. So that would more education is part of the solution.
Fantastic. Thanks to all three of you. Definitely huge amount of insights. Definitely my job was simplified because you were such great guests and had such fantastic insights. In fact, I sat back several times. I don't know if you realized, because you were on a rant, and a fantastic rant. So thanks again for participating. Looking forward to your talk in a few days, Bruno. Thanks, David, for joining us today from Canada. Brit as well, twice on the talk and on the panel today. So thanks a lot.